In today's death debate, we're talking about keeping human bodies in museums. If you haven't already seen our last death debate video on archaeology and digging up the dead, this debate kind of is a step along from that. Now, when we speak of human bodies in museums, we are referring to fully preserved whole bodies, either preserved specifically for display or not, and preserved specimens or body parts. And to recap, we're not talking about the artifacts that museums keep or the museums themselves, and neither I nor Gary have the answers here. And with that, let's debate bodies in museums. The good things about having bodies in museums. Economy. Large museums are a big hit with tourists, and this promotes a benefit for the surrounding economy. These large museums, such as London's British Museum, Philadelphia's Muda Museum, Vatican City's historical museums, and LA's Natural History Museum, all have full or partial bodies on display and in their catalogues behind the scenes. In fact, many of those human remains are a big draw card for these museums, which have become permanent fixtures and which visitors expect to see. People have always been fascinated by dead bodies, especially in modern history, where seeing one has become so rare they're considered a curiosity. That's why exhibits like Bodyworks and Body World and the Muda Museum have become so successful. Children. There's no shortage of research indicating the benefits of museum visits for children. They can provide memorable, immersive learning experiences, provoke imagination, introduce unknown worlds and subject matter, and offer unique environments for quality time with family. Being introduced to a body in a museum allows a child a unique opportunity to learn about death without having the emotional trauma attached. And as we said in our video, How to Talk to Your Kids About Death, it is important to recognise and use these moments as natural conversation starters with your kids. Students. Many museum curators cite their collections as being educational and that they awaken motivation in students to explore career options within the sciences. Many cite the exhibition of bodies in museums as educational for science and medical students. As the website of the British Museum states, display of human remains, both physically within the museum's galleries and online, is an important part of sharing this information to the widest possible audience. This not only spreads knowledge, but may also help generate enthusiasm for learning about our past, hopefully for the benefit of future generations. Safekeeping. Whenever a large museum is asked to give an international artifact or body back to its original community, we hear the same statement: we are keeping it safe. Safe from looters, war zones, armed conflicts. They argue that it's better for the body to stay safe there and provide a service to the museum than to be returned and possibly destroyed. The bad things about having bodies in museums. Morbid. The most simplistic argument for bodies to not be in museums will get out of the way first. For some people, it's as simple as, I just don't think it's appropriate for people to see that. And by that, they mean a dead body, not the potential ethical violation. So we'll just file that under death denial and anxiety and move right along. Consent. The individuals on display, with very, very rare exception, did not give their consent for their bodies to be displayed. Indeed, we can assume that they believe they would be interred within the beliefs of their culture and community. While museum curators will talk of handling the remains with respect, the fact that they're handling them at all, to many people, seems to contradict the definition of the word. Respect. This argument is for the respect of the body itself and for the community of which they came from. By keeping a body on display and away from their community and their traditions, no matter how old, museums are implying that their culture is more worthy than that of where the deceased is from. This is particularly true when the community in the current day has requested the return of the body and has been denied. International affairs. Some argue with so much international conflict around the world, returning bodies and body parts would be a very small but strong way to atone for misdeeds of the past. By not returning them, a host country is simply provoking other countries with something that would be so simple to remedy. Indeed, most bodies in museums currently have been there for many generations, so the claim of keeping them safe is very hard to justify at this point. Profiting from criminal acts. Theft via manipulation, deception, looting, or straight up stealing is regrettably how many museum items were obtained, no matter how many generations ago it was done. No matter how many ethical codes are written by museum associations, this part is strangely never mentioned. Indeed, many will try to claim that these items were gifts to the nation or that the remains were part of a private collection some time ago that the museum inherited, so they didn't technically steal them. Or, of course, it was our nation's territory at the time, all of which you wouldn't think would hold up in court, and yet... Other things to consider. While these are the arguments for or against, pros or cons, let's have a look at some rather neutral facts about the situation and the questions they raise. Now, there are many codes of ethics out there surrounding how bodies should be handled and exhibited at museums. Codes from national and international associations, and I'll link some of them below. The problem is, these aren't laws, nor do they always align, so nothing can really be done if any of these ethics are broken. But also, having a guide of ethics which promotes the respectful handling of the dead implies that it is okay to be handling and in possession of the dead in the first place. Like so many things, even with the best of intentions, the biases of those with the most control of the situation seeps through. The question is, if Egyptian museums were displaying the remains of, say, a US adventurer from 200 years ago, or a South Africa museum was displaying the brain of a 200-year-old British person, would the people of the UK and US suddenly think those ethics were unjustified? In researching this video, I looked in depth into 18 large museums over all continents who have full or partial human remains in their collections. And a reoccurring theme kept coming up, which I'm sure will shock absolutely no one, but I did feel like the fact needed to be stated outright. Countries that were mostly white and highly developed had bodies from non-white, non-developed countries or communities in their possession, and their museums showed off collections from around the world. Countries that don't fit that description in one way or another tend to have museums embracing their own culture and that of past cultures on their land. They do not have bodies from other countries, but they may show their own, which leads us to two questions. One, do museums inadvertently continue and memorialise colonialism and racism? And two, on a different note, is it okay to display bodies of ancient cultures that are tied to the country's modern day people? Egyptian museums displaying ancient Egyptian mummies, for example. Lastly, while it's not an argument for either side, it is worth noting what independent experts from host nations recognise: that these large museums are scared of more requests for bodies and artefacts to be returned and the subsequent perceived loss of reputation as their catalogue dwindles. Also, the consequent loss of jobs. They are scared of opening their can of worms and the conversations about stolen historical items and facing up to the horrors of the past. To give up these items would be to admit a loss of power, something that not only the museum would feel, but those nations as a whole would feel. Ownership over perceived important, rare, expensive items, and indeed the ownership of people, has always been a symbol of power and prestige. And an individual or nation is loath to give that up. Many wars have been fought over such things. In Australia, unlike some other countries, being in possession of a body and or being able to open a museum is very tightly regulated. Jono down the block can't decide to open up one and show whatever he can get his grubby little mitts on. So on one hand, that's a good thing. On the other hand, the ethical debate on whether large prestigious museums should have human remains in the collections at all still rages on. So what are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments. Now, go talk death.